Hey there everybody and welcome. In this tutorial we're going to learn a little bit on how to create 3D logos using an Adobe Illustrator file in Autodesk Maya. So to start, I have this stock graphic of this lion, looks like a football club kind of an emblem. You want to make sure that your Illustrator file is all outlined and expanded, and you can do that by going to Object and Expand to get that expanded. And then the second step is when you save this, you're going to want to ensure that you save it as a legacy Illustrator version. So I like to go to Illustrator 8. What this does is kind of takes away a little bit of the, maybe gradient effects or any kind of special new things that Illustrator may have had that could interfere with Maya. So we're going to go ahead and save that off and we'll be ready to go. So now that we have that good to go, let's go ahead and get into Autodesk Maya. I'm using Maya 2023 here, but this method honestly works in multiple versions of Maya. So to get our logo in, we're going to go to Create, and we're going to go to Adobe Illustrator Object, and we're going to make sure that we select the option box. Once we select the option box, we have two choices. We can either bevel everything before we come in, or just import the curves. Now, as tempting as this may look, typically this method does not work the first time you do it. So if you try to just bevel everything and pull it in, it's going to look like a complete mess. And that's based off of the CVs and the different types of structure in your vector curve file. So we're going to just do curves and hit create. And then I'm going to navigate to my converted file and go ahead and hit open. I'm going to hit F on my keyboard to kind of zoom out, and then that's going to give me a pretty good look at the curve structure. If your curves look a little jagged, remember you can hit the 3 key just to see them kind of in full smooth mode. Now that I have this, we're going to kind of do a very repetitive process to bring this to life. And this is going to be using the Surfaces menu and the Bevel Plus function. You can find the Surfaces menu under the Modeling submenu, and then at the top by going to Surfaces. Now, before we start that, just like we did with the Illustrator tool, we're going to want to go to the option box, and we're going to want to make sure a few things are set to our liking. I like to go ahead and output as polygons, and by default, we're going to change this from count to sampling a little later, but you can keep everything the way it is. By having a face count of 200, though, do not expect a terribly dense model. It's actually going to be pretty low poly. So we're going to go ahead and hit close real quick, because before we do that specifically, we need to start selecting the elements in our screen. So we're going to dive right in and start with the face of the line. And we're going to do Surfaces, Bevel Plus. Again, just double checking them on polygons and hitting bevel. Now, once you have a beveled element, we can kind of go to the attribute editor, which can be found by clicking this button at the top or going to the tab to the right and going to the Bevel Plus option and just adjusting some of those bevel options. Now, what I like to do is I like to change my method to sampling, and I change my sampling method to the very second option, and that's extrude section and curve span, and that will give you, again, really the most smooth version to allow you to kind of play with some of these settings. So we have the bevel width, which we can play with. I'm going to give this a little bit more bevel width than the other elements. And then we have the extrusion, which we can pull out a little bit. And maybe we'll pull that out to maybe 4. And the extrude distance will just be the amount of extrudes. So you can see these clusters of edges. When I pull that out, you can kind of start to see that bevel at work. So the further out that is, the more prevalent that's going to be in your final product. So it's really up to you how you pull those in or out as you go. Now that we have that, we can go ahead and repeat the process. Let's grab the eyes. And in this case, we're going to go to Bevel Plus, and we're going to go ahead and just hit Bevel Plus. And we'll go in, and again, just to keep the eyes aligned with the face, we'll kind of keep those the same. Now, here's a hotkey for you. If you hit the G key, it will do the last command that you just did. So again, we have Bevel Plus, and you'll notice that I can quickly hop into the option boxes and, play a little with those specific distances. So if you're seeing that certain things don't align, and this happens, you can see this eye is actually further back than this specific eye. Don't worry, we can kind of move those around a little later. when we finalize the product. So now that we have kind of these setups, again, we're going to want to go to sampling and extrusion and just kind of keep those default. That's just going to give us the kind of the best look on here. Sampling, extrusion, great. And again, we can play with the settings just to keep those smooth. I think 11 looks really good right here. And that's just adding verts and curves to my actual geometry. Everything looks really good on the lion face itself. Now let's move on to these hair pieces. Now we're going to use a little trick here by saving a preset. So we're going to go to Bevel Plus and we're going to just run what we normally do. And I'm going to go ahead and just set up the bevel to be flat. So in this case, I want it to be 0. You can see that it's just, a super flat piece of geometry. And I like that. I'm not going to play with it too much, but we'll go to our sampling just to be safe. And we will set our section and our span. And just to get that smoothness, we'll up the value of that just so we have really nice smooth edges. Now, when we get to this point, I can actually go to the presets button and I can save that as a preset. So when I do that, I'm going to call this main, and we're going to hit save preset. And so now it will always be up there to add. So when you start doing this and you hit the G key, we have to run one more bevel here. And we could simply go to presets, run main, and hit replace. And then the way that I like to do this is I like to just run through now without hitting that preset and just hit G, and we'll run the preset a little later. So I'm going to go through here and click on these specific areas. Again, just working our way down here. And then once I have those areas specifically selected, I can go through and I can just make sure that, again, that preset is hit on each one. So I kind of work left to right and hit main, replace, and then main, replace. And I'm just going to kind of work down this area so I can get it to look the way I want. And this is going to just take a few seconds, but it's actually a relatively quick process for you to do. And if you hit G here, you'll notice that it doesn't apply that preset. So again, some of you thinking, oh, I can just hit the G key. But overall, I mean, this would be a lot harder to model if we were just doing this with straight up polygons. So again, I'm just working my way left to right and just double checking that I get all of those little pieces. And it's looking like I hit most of them. And I'm just kind of looking at the bevel width just to make sure I grab those all as I go. So again, a really great tool to kind of streamline the process and get you kind of set up for a really cool looking file. All right, now that you have that, we can continue on and we can do the same thing to this. Now, if we really want and we know, again, that Bevel Plus option, we can go into the option box and actually set those to be specific segments. So again, I can start by having a segment of, again, 15 spans, knowing what that does now, and I can start by having a section of 0 here. And so now when I hit that bevel, it's going to give me that smooth line. And then I can just hit my G key and kind of work my way through, again, in this case, the text. Now, if you have a curve with two different pieces, grab the outside curve, hold shift, grab the inside curve, and hit G. And we're going to just kind of go through the numbers and the letters here just to make these look really, really nice. And again, sometimes you have to hold shift. There we go. And now it just really becomes going through and adding these bevels to your liking. So again, we're going to play with the placement of these a little later, but I'm going to kind of go through and just select some of these, maybe the scarf, hit G, backdrop to the scarf, this element, and then look, we have two, so outside and then hold shift inside. And you can see this process gets really quick, really easily once you kind of have all your curves in order. So now that I have these, and we can change these bevels later. So again, don't fret if it's not working out or if you want to adjust. And we'll get these little filigrees we go. That looks really good. And we'll take a look at this, and it's looking pretty good. Again, the distance and the extrude distance needs some work, but overall really, really nice. So one thing I want to do a little bit down here, and I may turn on my wireframe on render here just so I can see this, is I want to play with these bevels of the actual football. And so I may go in and just up those, and we'll do 2 here. And I like to copy and paste so I can just navigate pretty quickly to each one. This is pretty forgiving right now. There we go. There we go. There we go. Looks pretty good. And then we have that soccer ball in the very end. We can kind of start playing with the distances of these items just to get it a little more life. Maybe we scale them a little bit, pull it back a little bit, just to play with some thicknesses throughout. You know, you want to get that kind of nice look to this. And things like this initial shield, again, we can play with all of these settings, and I'm going to just grab everything here and kind of adjust and pull back. Now, at a certain point, if you're noticing, okay, these curves are getting in the way, and if you have the bevels the way you like them, you can actually delete the history of these specific bevels. So I still want to do a couple more kind of bevel works here. 0.3, 1.3, just kind of going through, creating this awesome logo. And there we go. So we're getting some really, really nice options now. Now that I have that, I'm going to do a quick save. So we're going to go to Save Scene As. And we'll navigate to our folder, and we'll put Lion V1 and save that out as a Maya file just so we have a backup. Now that I have that, let's detach the curve. So let's highlight the whole thing with our marquee tool, and we'll go to Edit, Delete All by Type History. And when we delete that type, things are going to look pretty good here. That means the curves are separated. I like to keep my curves intact just in case I mess up later. So I go ahead to the display layers in the channel box, and I'm going to go ahead and name that layer curves by double clicking. You can even make these different colors if you wish, and then they'll be that color. But I'm going to turn the visibility off here. And for the most part, now I can kind of control the different distances I have. Another thing I like to do right off the bat is I modify center my pivot, and that's just going to ensure that my pivot is going to actually be in place for all of these elements. So a couple things I'm going to start moving back are, for instance, the shield that you saw in the beginning. So now that I have that shield kind of moved back, I may stretch it out just to make it a little more weighty. Again, it's going to cast some nice shadows eventually. And I'm going to go ahead and grab some of the lion's manes that didn't really line up. This is going to be more of a relief sculpture. So again, I don't necessarily need this to be matching perfectly from the outside in, but I am kind of keeping in mind the placement of some of these objects. So things are looking pretty good here. This one looks to be a little further back. So I'll scale it up just to match its partner on the other side, and then that ear, and then this one looks also to be needing to be pulled up. And again, you're just using your eye, and you're just trying to get some symmetry happening. That eye was a big point of contention because it was so far back, so we could actually just move that eye up a little bit. And that's going to give us some nice shadows as we go. Now, if you didn't like how far you extruded, you can shrink these things back in. Again, no harm, no foul. And I'm pushing through a little bit, but I'm not going to see the backside of my logo here in this particular case. And let's select this soccer ball. And I'm just holding the Shift key to grab all those elements. And I'm going to pull this back. And I can even hit Control G to group this. center my pivot. Just get these into place a little bit. Move them down. Just adjust using some of my hotkeys just to align these to be exactly where I want, because I don't want them to cut through too much. Everything else is looking pretty good. I do want to move this kind of extruded piece back just slightly. So this is something that is just going to kind of be the backdrop. And then, you know, obviously we got to work on these letters here, but I'm going to move these back as well just to get some depth happening. And we could move this to the very back. It's still going to do the same thing just to give us that distance and that shadow. It's really up to you. Again, since we're not going to really see the side of this logo, I may want to interpenetrate those a little bit deeper. And again, if we want to move everything, we can hold the Shift key, highlight our elements. We could group these. We can also just adjust. So now we see just a lion. And you can keep going back to your Illustrator file if you want to kind of verify if you want to see that or not. So again, if you want that, you know, the lion's mane to kind of cut over, I actually think that looks a little nicer. We can go ahead and do that. But overall, this looks really good. I'm going to hit the save key and we are ready to start to color in our work. So if we open up Illustrator, we're going to look at some of the options we have for this. So I like to have this as my template where I can see I basically have gold and black throughout. So let's go ahead and do this. Now we can highlight this color. We can choose our own color. We're going to just kind of use some standard surface materials. So the first one, as you can see, was that face of the lion. I'm going to right click on it and I'm going to use Arnold to render this. So I'm going to go to new material and open my new material bin and go to shader, and then I'm going to navigate downward to standard surface. And here it's really cool because you actually have some presets. So we do have a gold preset that we'll take a look at here, and we can always change this as we go, but I'm going to put that in to start. And then, you know, it's pretty easy. I can then kind of go through and select all of my gold pieces. And it's kind of funny because the gold pieces will show up black at first, so don't be worried that you're doing something wrong. I'm going to do existing material, and we're going to do AI standard surface, and we may want to call this gold shader. There we go, just so we know what we're putting on. Hopping back, we've done the lion face. Everything is gold on the outside rims and the text. So again, this is where it becomes super easy. I'm holding shift. I'm grabbing my elements that are gold, going to that existing gold shader and adding those in. Awesome. And then it looks like these elements on the ball are also gold. So we'll do that too. Existing material, gold shader. Things are looking good. I'm going to turn off my grid because that grid is kind of getting in the way of my pieces. And I'm digging it. We got to add the gold to the numbers. This is kind of a cathartic process as well. So one of the harder parts on this one specifically is going to be the text in the background drop, because it's almost like it's cut out. But we're going to just go ahead and add gold to one more place, and then we'll deal with our black shader as we go. So things are looking good. We're going to add gold to this scarf. That looks awesome. And then we're going to go in and make our black shader. So again, for the black shader, we're going to right click and we're going to go to assign new material. We're going to go back to the AI standard surface. If you're using Arnold, you can use the shader of your choice if you're using a different renderer. And we have some options here. You can see we have plastic, we have car paint, we have metallic, we have chrome. Because we're using kind of an already kind of shiny surface, we may want to think about, again, the different options we have. So if I go down here and, you know, if maybe I use rubber for the black version, and, you know, I can change this setting a little later. And if I don't, I can just simply highlight this, select this black, and then we'll call this black shader. And we need to render it really to see what's happening. So again, we're going to take all of these other elements that we know are going to be black, and we're going to right click, and we're going to do black shader. And I think our eyes were actually gold. So let me go back, and I forgot to add those. We're adding gold shader. All right, so it looks like everything's completely black, but the next step is to do some render tests. So I'm going to go to the Arnold setup at the top of the screen. I'm going to go to lights, and I'm going to create a sky dome light. That's going to give me this sky dome, and I can go ahead and render this right off the bat without adding anything, and this is going to give me a pretty good idea of what's happening behind the scenes. So overall, it looks pretty good. It looks like I do have some messiness in this particular view, and we'll dive into that in a second. But let's zoom in and go to Arnold again and see what we can get. So you can see here, it looks like one of these elements is giving us that mess up, and it looks indeed to be kind of the scarf-like element. Now this is tricky because you wouldn't see that otherwise. Everything else looks pretty darn clean, and it looks clean in here. So if you're getting an element that looks a little messy, what you can do is attempt a mesh cleanup on it. So I'm going to go to mesh, and we're going to go to cleanup and hit the option box, and we're going to check faces with more sides and hit cleanup, and it's going to look pretty rough, but we're going to see if that helps us at all. And sure enough, it did. So that just basically removes some of the n-gons that were in it. N-gons are faces with more than 5 sides. So now, or 4 sides, pardon me. So now that I have this kind of set up, again, I can start playing with that render, just making sure I don't have any more of those troublesome areas. This is looking really, really good. All right, let's go ahead and add a backdrop. And so I'm going to do a backdrop here. We'll scale this up, and we'll rotate this 90 degrees. There we go. And we're going to just move this kind of inward. And again, we'll set up our camera in a second, but we're going to add that black material to the back. Looks pretty good. Now, if you want your camera set up, you have these little options at the top of your screen in which you can set that up. We're not adding any terribly crazy light just yet. So again, I'm just kind of looking at my render, kind of figuring out what it looks like. You can see when I render that out, it looks rather nice. And I'm getting some pretty good options. I don't have any shine or highlights because I don't have anything for it to reflect. So again, pretty decent look for that shader. So let's kind of move forward and play a little bit more with the lighting. So now that I have this set up, I'm going to go into my attribute or my outliner. I'm going to grab that sky dome and go to my attribute editor. And we're going to attach an HDR image to it. So I'm going to go in and create a file under color. And this is just my sky dome that I created. And I'm going to hit file, and I'm going to navigate back to my club folder, which is right there. And I'm going to choose this Orlando Stadium kind of setup, and I'm going to hit open. Now, by doing that, again, if I hit 7, you're going to see we're going to start to get some pretty cool reflections, and we actually have a cool stadium kind of highlight in the background, and it's just picking up on that gold, which is rather nice. So if I go ahead and hit render, this is going to take a little longer to render, but it's going to give us a potentially cooler option. So we're going to let that kind of render out a little bit and see what we get. All right, you can see that it takes a couple seconds, in this case of around 2 seconds, to kind of render out. But overall, I'm really liking this look. We do want to add a couple more lights to this, but if you want to rotate your dome, you can do that as well. And so if you want to change, again, the highlights or the shadows based on that picture, you can totally do that. So I'm going to run a quick save here. We'll do save scene as, and we'll call this light and hit OK. And I may add a couple of Arnold lights in here. So let's go to lights, and we'll do an area light. Area lights in Arnold, if you don't know, the bigger they are, the more diffuse the light's going to be. So again, a little tip. And we'll come back to this camera view in a second, but I'm going to go over here to the left and just kind of angle it this way to see what we can get. Pull that back in. And then the intensity, we have a couple options. We can do 100 and again, run our render. That's looking pretty good. Getting that nice kind of gradient from the background image, which is really nice as well. And there we go. So I may want to play with this shader in the background a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and add a new material. And I'm going to add that standard surface again. And I just want to see with a flat standard surface what we're looking at, because we're going to get better shadows that way. And sure enough, we get some really nice shadows with that. So what can I add to that background to kind of make it pop? Let's look at some textures. So, when we're thinking about textures and we want to add maybe carbon fiber, I'm going to go carbon fiber texture, and we're going to grab a carbon fiber texture online. And we'll find a cool one here and save it to our folder behind the scenes. Again, you can go to your favorite texture site and grab these. And I'm going to do that. Perfect. And I want to do color and file. And this time we'll go back to that football club folder. We'll add the carbon fiber. And it's going to be kind of hard to see in this particular case, so just be aware of that. But we're going to go and play with that texture setting, and we're going to repeat it maybe 10 times in each direction. So again, have some fun with this. Render. So it's still a little dark for me. If you want to lighten up your scene, you can actually go to the sky dome. We can play with the intensity of the sky dome if we want. And as you can see, that's going to definitely do it. Another little trick is if the intensity key, and this is actually working rather well, but if the intensity key isn't working, you can go into the file itself and play a little bit with the exposure of the dome. You can play with the color gain. Again, that's going to affect the different areas within the scene. But I'm really liking this look that I'm getting. I'm getting a cool gradient off of it and whatnot. So now I'm ready kind of for my final render. And now that I have this kind of final render, I can do a couple different things. Maybe we want to group everything together just to be safe. Again, we're going to hit save. We're going to grab that group, and we could even duplicate this group and scale these down to start making a pattern of some sort. And we'll grab both these groups, duplicate them, just have a little pattern happening. And again, we're just trying to add some life to this. Going back to that area light, we can add a little bit more to our area light here. And we'll run a quick render just to see what this looks like. That's looking really, really sharp. All right, now the cool thing is if you're getting good renders, that's great. But if you're getting noise in your renders, you can change it up a few different ways. So if I go to my render settings, I can look at a few different things to get rid of noise in Arnold. So I'm going to go to the Arnold Render tab, and I can up my multiplier. If you have a very fast card, that's going to help. But it's going to also add a lot more render time to your final product. You can see the noise has been reduced. One of my favorite ways, though, if you're using an NVIDIA RTX card, is to actually use something called the denoiser. So denoiser is a really, really powerful tool. So I'm going to quickly use the denoiser, but I'm going to up my resolution to 1080. And I'm going to add in my render view something called an imager. So we're going to let this run, because what's going to happen, you can even hit stop here because it doesn't need to be in process. So again, we're going to add an imager, and if you have the denoiser noise, you can go ahead and do that. And what this will do without very little work is when we render it next time, it's going to kind of do a post-process for us where it's going to remove all the noise. So we're going to let that run through. This is going to take a little bit longer than your standard render, but it's going to get rid of all those kind of fireflies that you see ultimately in your final scene. So give this a few seconds or minutes depending on your machine. Run that through. Again, the AI Imager Denoiser Nice is going, or Noise, whatever you want to call it, is going to be a complete game changer for you when it comes to kind of getting those smooth-esque renders. And again, you just got to be patient. It may feel like it's freezing at times, but as you can see, it clicks back in. I'm doing this in real time for you, so you can see that process could look like something's frozen, but it's not. It's just processing. You can, if you look really closely, you don't see much noise anymore, which is a really nice thing. So we're going to kind of let that go through, going up to 60% here, getting there. And we're going to just let that run. So I'm going to hit pause real quick to just get that final 60%, and we'll come back with the final render. All right, we're back. You can see that took about 1:45, which isn't too bad. And I'm going to go to File, Save Image. We're going to navigate to our football folder, and we're going to save that final image, and we'll call this final image.jpg, and we'll hit save. And let's take a look at that final image. All right, give it a second to kind of save through, and there we go. So within a matter of like 30 minutes, you can create professional looking kind of logos and 3D effects and really cool designs. We could take this into Photoshop and adjust the color correction, add more flair to it. You know, we could even do some kind of masking to get some cool depth of field blur as well. But overall, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and you now know how to create an Illustrator file into a 3D logo in Autodesk Maya. Thanks, everyone.